I know a lot of you are like me and looking for the perfect book to read on Halloween this year, and I have you covered. Today I have 10 books to talk about that are all set on Halloween or really close to the actual date, and of course we'll give you those spooky feels. I have horror books, I have mysteries, and a little bit of everything in between. So if you're looking for something to pick up October 31st, I got you covered. Let's get started. First, let's start with All Hallows by Christopher Golden, and this is a horror coming-of-age story that is set in 1984. We follow two families in Massachusetts where they are spending Halloween night. This story is one that just explodes with references to the holiday. So we have people in costume, people trick-or-treating, we have the whole nostalgia for the 1980s, and again, really surrounding the holiday feel to that all. So if you're looking for that, this book is definitely going to scratch that itch. It is one that is again about these different individuals. There's possibly a boogeyman who is on the loose, and it certainly is one that is meant to invoke feelings of things like It and Stranger Things, and of course all coming together on Halloween night. So it's very much a straightforward story, but again, if you're looking for something that is going to give you the Halloween feels and make you think of all the good things you love so much about this holiday, this is a good book to pick up, especially in October. Next, we have How to Survive Your Own Murder by Danielle Valentine. This is a piece of young adult horror / mystery with time travel elements because we follow a young woman, a teenager whose sister a year ago on Halloween was murdered. Now a year later on Halloween, she's at the courthouse at the trial of her murderer, and she goes into the bathroom, something happens, and she finds herself a year earlier on Halloween night and then has to rush to try to save her sister. This is one that I really like because it blends together different genres. It's a little bit non-sequential in the way that you are trying to piece everything together and figure out what's going to happen. I would say it's not the scariest book on this list. Again, with the idea of saving the sister, it feels more like an adventure ride, very cinematic, and the kind of thing that would make a really good teen movie. But I certainly had fun with it. Again, it has those Halloween references because of course these young people are celebrating Halloween a year prior, and so that is all mixed up with the terrible things that you know are going to ensue. I had a lot of fun with this one. I think a lot of you will too if you want something really fast and sweet and you don't want something that's really long, especially if you're going to read it on October 31st. This is one that you can breeze through. Next is The Graveyard Shift by Maria Lewis, and this is a story that follows a young woman who has a podcast where she talks about all creepy and horror things, basically a podcast for horror fans. However, on Halloween, it appears as if someone who calls into the radio show possibly is murdered on the air, and of course from there they have to investigate what is happening. At first I think it might just be a Halloween prank, and of course there is more to the story as it goes along. This is one that is not only a good book to read around Halloween, but is also a good book to read if you are a fan of horror itself, and I definitely think a lot of you watching this video are, so I do recommend this one. In my opinion, it's a little bit more underhyped than some of the other books on this list, but certainly worth checking out and a great one to read in October. Next up, we have Kill Creek by Scott Thomas, which is a pretty popular buzzy book, but if you don't know it, it's a horror novel that follows 4 different authors who all write horror and are somewhat meant to be archetypes or stereotypes of popular authors that actually exist, and together they go into this house that is supposedly haunted and agree to spend the night. However, things of course go horribly wrong as they do. You have some really unlikable characters. Definitely some of the characters are just meant to be the worst part of authors and celebrities in general and really play into that. So you're going to be hoping certain characters die and hoping other ones don't. This book is not perfect. It's actually not a personal favorite of mine. I don't love the fact that the characters are such stereotypes because in my mind it really makes it less interesting when they feel like they're just caricatures rather than well-rounded human beings. And so I do recommend this one. Again, if you want a book that is set specifically on Halloween night, this one fits the bill. I think it has a lot of appeal for those that just love slashers and all of that. I wanted more depth from this one. I wanted a little bit more than I got, but I still would very much recommend it for this video. I think a lot of you will love it. A lot of you do already love it, and so I did want to include it on the list, even if it's not my personal favorite. Next, we have The Halloween Party by Agatha Christie, and this of course is a mystery novel, not a horror novel, that involves a murder that takes place during a Halloween party, and then of course the investigation that happens afterwards. This was actually my first Agatha Christie book that I finished, and I don't think it was necessarily the best place to start because I do very much acknowledge that this is not their strongest work. However, it's a Halloween-y book, so I had to check it out, and I'm going to recommend this one specifically to those of you watching this video. I don't know how many of you there are that don't really love horror, that aren't looking for something spooky or scary, and instead want something about Halloween that doesn't necessarily actually hit on the scary parts of the holiday. I know a few of you are still watching my video even if you don't love the blood and guts and gore like a lot of us do. So if you're looking for a mystery story that is going to feel a little bit cozy with a smart twist and turn within it, this is a very safe one to pick up that still will give you the Halloween feels and references to the holiday. Next we have Glass Houses by Louise. This is a book in the mystery series all about Inspector Gamache. It is set in a small Quebecois French town here in Canada, and this is not the first book in the series, but you can read this one as a standalone. This is a book, as I mentioned, that is a mystery, not horror, so it is one of these recommendations for those of you that are the small minority that prefer their Halloween reads without the scary bits to them. Instead, this is one that starts on Halloween night, but is almost not about the usual Halloween things that you would expect, so it's a bit of a palate cleanser between some of these other books. It is set on Halloween where there is a party and someone shows up who is dressed very mysteriously. They don't know who he is, and eventually is revealed to everyone in this small town who they are and why they're there. And it ends up being a really interesting story that involves a piece of history that is quite forgotten and was really interesting to unravel. You can tell the author did a ton of research for this book, and don't look up any of the afterword or explanations until you read the book because it kind of gives away the whole thing. Again, of the books on this list, this one is the least Halloween-y. I know that's not an actual descriptor, but it's not going to give you the Halloween feels as much as some of the other books, but it's set on the day to begin with. And it is a great starting point because it's such an unsettling start with this mysterious man, and the book did not go where I expected. It went somewhere entirely different, and I love this book, but I feel like no one talks about it because it's such a strange story, but it worked so well. Then we have Disturbed by Jennifer Jaynes, and this is a thriller story that is centered around an individual who is the lone survivor of a massacre that occurred on Halloween. Now, on the anniversary of those horrible murders, she is potentially being contacted and potentially is wondering if the killer is still out there. Is there someone coming for her, and all of those good things. This is one that I recommend to anyone who loves the setup of these horror slasher stories, but told through the lens of a thriller story, because it's very much a twisty-turny psychological adventure. And again, it is all set around Halloween, but a Halloween that's gone horribly, horribly wrong. So certainly the character is not just having a fun old time on the anniversary of her friend's death, and instead it's a very foreboding story, very suspenseful. You have that sense of worry and fear and trauma, PTSD, that has all come out of this holiday that is just someone's worst nightmare. In my mind, this one is quite underhyped. I've recommended it a few times on my channel and bring it up again because I don't see a lot of other people reading it, and I think it was a really solid story, a great one to read. I remember it being quite short, so I think you can read it in just a single sitting, or at least a single day if you have the time. I think you will fly through it. Next, we have Dark Harvest by Norman Partridge. This is a very short horror novella or horror story that follows this small town. I believe it's set in the 1960s, and there is this entity known as October Boy. He rises from the cornfields each year and has this butcher knife, and of course chases after people. It is a slasher story. It is told in a very interesting narrative way, and again, given the fact that the story is so short, I think it really packs a good punch, and again is a great one if you're looking for a book you can read in a single day. This one I think is quite well known. It shows up on a lot of lists, but I do recommend it again because I think if you haven't read it yet, it's really one to experience at least once. I've read it physically, I've also done the audio. Both are great experiences, so pick your poison and enjoy this book. I really hope you like it. I think it's a pretty special one, and again, at the very least, it is unique, which is one of my favorite things I'm always looking for when I pick up a good book. Next is Ghost Road Blues by Jonathan Maberry, which is the first book in a trilogy, so if you enjoyed this one, you can continue on. This is set in the month of October leading up to Halloween in a town that has a history of violence. They believe they have moved past all that. However, as the story begins, perhaps things are coming back. This is a very classic setup for horror story. You have the small town, you have all the individuals with their secrets, their grudges, the challenges between the different characters as they're trying to get along, and of course the terrible things that ensue. This one wasn't entirely up my alley, but I really do think it's a story that while I didn't entirely love, a lot of you will love it even more than I did. This one is very action-packed, and I think a lot of you looking for something that's a page turner will really enjoy it. It's a relatively long book, so probably not one you could read in a day, but certainly you could read it in the weeks leading up to Halloween, and hopefully will be just what you're looking for. Last is Night of the Living Queer, which is not a novel, but rather a short story collection, something I don't read and review as much on my channel, but this is a collection of horror stories that are all centered around the young adult experience. Particularly, they are written, as you can probably guess from the title, from the perspective of queer young people. And what I love about this series, or series of stories rather, is that they're all specifically set on Halloween. A lot of times when I read these Halloween type collections, they are only vaguely referencing the holiday, and they can be so loose that they kind of feel like the authors are missing the original prompt. Instead, these ones are right on the money. You have kids at Halloween parties, trying on costumes, all of the checklists you would expect for a story collection like this. And then you also have this young adult coming of age experience woven into the story. This is the kind of book that I just think has so much appeal to young people. Again, it's really not just the queer experience, but just in general, the awkwardness of growing up, the challenges, the worrying about fitting in, and all of those really universal things to the young person experience. Something that I'm grateful that I'm past, but I would love to put this book in the hands of a young person. I think that it's the kind of book that just almost anyone of that age is really going to find something they like in there. And again, the stories are not just relevant to that, but also pretty decently punchy. They have some good creepy horror moments in it, and just kind of the right balance for exactly what I was looking for when I picked up the collection. And like I said, I'm not the target audience. I am well past my teenage years, but can definitely appreciate a good Halloween short story collection. So that is it for this video here. I'd love to know the books I talked about. Which ones are you planning on checking out this Halloween season? And of course, if you have other books or recommendations for things set on Halloween or just around that time of year, I'd love for you to recommend them in the comments down below. I'm sure a lot of us will find it helpful to learn about even more books that we can read this year. Hope you're having a good autumn season. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, all those good things. And if you enjoyed this, I'll be talking to you again soon. Okay, bye-bye.